Hey guys, welcome back at Ting and Ting. Yes, man. Often wonder where did the British royalty came from? Who were they? What their family tree was like? You understand what I mean? And in this video, we're going to take a look at that, albeit a brief one. And you might not give like a complete tree of everybody. We're going to take a quick look at it and and this one is a brief history of the royal family. So let's get into this and see where that is coming from. Let's YouTube and simmer.
1066, the start of the royal family on these fair isles. Well, there were kings in many countries before that, and druids before that, and Pangaea before that, but we have to start somewhere, and a millennia ago is plenty far. If that leaves out Ethelred the Unready, so it goes. William the Conqueror conquered in the Norman Conquest, Norman here being code for French. Because it's the olden days, people had lots of kids, but to keep things simple, this family tree is going to leave out many of them on each branch because not every child matters. So William had 3 kids we care about: William II, Henry I, and Adela. If you've seen the video about royal succession, click here if you haven't, you'll know that formal rules for passing on the crown will get established, but for now it's a free-for-all home team advantage to the eldest son. But never forget, bigger army diplomacy. Upon William the Conqueror's death, William II became king. William II didn't marry, and on a bro's day out with Henry, died in a hunting accident that gave Henry I the crown. Henry I had at least 26 children, of which only 2 were 100% legit. He declared his daughter would rule next after his son died in a shipwreck, and swore his knights to honor Empress Matilda by crossing their hearts, hoping to die, sticking a needle in their eye. But when Henry I died while Matilda was in France, many ignored this while her cousin Stephen raced to Westminster using faster army diplomacy to get coronated first. Empress Matilda did eventually return and start a decades-long civil war that was pretty much a stalemate because turtling in the 1100s was an effective RTS tactic.
Wow.
While she did rule part of the island, as Matilda never had an official coronation, her monarchical status is disputed. Now, as Stephen's children were either dead, disinterested, or a nun, his crown went to his...
I've noticed in a lot of history, they sort of leave out the fact that women were back there battling it up too for power. They were back there, they had their armies and stuff, and they were trying to gain power or gain their rightful power back and thing. Women were in there, maybe not as much as men, but they were in there. They were in it, you know what I mean, and thing.
AB usurpation, attritional war, and decided waiting until after the death of the current king before sorting out the next king didn't work. So Henry II changed the system and crowned Henry the Young co-king with him, invoking the rule of 2. 1 is none. 2 is 1. If it's important, you need a backup. It was a good plan for stability, helped by the young king's popularity, but unfortunately the apprentice rebelled against the master, rallying his brothers, which resulted in another civil war of disputed monarchs, during which Henry the Young died of dysentery, Henry the Elder died of fever, and Richard I took the crown. After Richard came John and 4 eldest son successions in a row. John to Henry III, insert Magna Carta here, to Edward I, Longshanks to Edward II, to Edward III. Actually, Ed II was overthrown by Isabel of France, aka the She-Wolf of France, aka his wife. After deposing her husband, she acted as regent for their son. Every one of these arrows glosses over a bit of complexity. Edward III had 5 sons: Edward the Black Prince, Lionel, John, Edmund, and Thomas, none of which would wear the crown. When Edward III died, his throne would have gone to the Black Prince, but he was dead at the time, so the crown went to his boringly named son Richard, now the second. There's a bunch of drama llama stuff around Richard II, which your English teacher might force you to read about, but spoiler alert, history's ending is always the same: bigger army diplomacy. This time from Henry IV, who gets the crown, and Richard II gets starvation and captivity. Another Henry before we get to the War of the Roses, a war that strikes terror and boredom in the minds of students of history the nation over, who have to deal with this family tree simplified to explain why everyone was angry. But the shortest version ever is Edward III's great-great-grandsons duked it out, even though one of them was dead for part of the fight, but we can't get into that now, so Henry VI to Edward IV to Henry VI to Edward IV, the end. Edward IV on his deathbed left his crown to his son, but being 12, he needed protection, so Richard, his bestest uncle in the world, promised to take super good care of him. Edward V then promptly disappeared under suspicious circumstances that left Richard to become Richard III. But he didn't stay king for long, because Edward III's great-great-great-great-grandson Henry VII took the crown, put a ring on Elizabeth of York to lock down that royal legitimacy, and then sired Henry VIII, splitter of churches and ladies. Henry VIII thought it was high time to formalize the rules of inheritance, so he wrote them out in his will, basically saying oldest boys first, girls only if there aren't any boys. And Parliament approved the rules, which should have made everything neat and tidy, but we're about to enter the really messy time, because Henry's son lived just long enough to screw it up. Inheriting the throne at 9, there was, of course, a scheming protectorate running things, yet he still declared at 15 that his father's rules were dumb and his sisters were dumb, and that his first cousin once removed, Lady Jane Grey, should be the next monarch instead. Then he died and Lady Jane Grey became queen at sweet 16. Sort of, in a disputed status way, for 9 days, until beheaded by Mary, the first really, truly, officially, nobody doubts it queen. Mary didn't have any kids and passed the crown to Elizabeth I, who became the second queen in a row to also not have children. But no problem, because Lady Jane Grey was next in right. Now this is the point at which we acknowledge Scotland exists. They've been doing their own royal thing, which for our purposes joins the English branch where Edward III's great-granddaughter married into it in the 1400s, and then goes James, 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 Mary Queen of Scots, James, bringing us back to the 1600s. Henry VIII's sister, importantly, also married into this line of the family, giving it English legitimacy points in the eyes of the English Parliament, which asked to borrow Scotland's James, making him king of 2 countries, with 2 numbers in his name depending on where you're counting from. James had a son, Charles I, and you might think this unification of the monarchs means the very messy time is over. But no, because Cromwell. Cromwell didn't like kings and beheaded Charles I, declaring no royals no longer, making himself the...
Listen, man. They like the beheading back then, didn't they? So I remember a few years ago, I guess it was about 2 or 3 years ago, the prince at the time and his wife happened to go by through there was a demonstration of young people. I don't know what they were protesting, but as they were driving by, somebody shouted, "Off with the heads!" And I'm like, man, they don't want to go back to medieval times and start chopping heads off of kings and things, you know what I mean? That's crazy, you know what I mean? But it's crazy how these successions happen, you know what I mean? Or successions, I should say, happen, you know? And they kept it in the families. This person's grand, and then like you see there, it went back to the 1600s, you know, because of some family ties. Wow, nepotism as its greatest, man. You know what I mean? Well, now people want the father to be president, the son to be president, the grandson to be president. You know, the only difference is it's not kings anymore, but they have to let people vote them in. So they groom their kids for that, you know, and put them out there, you know what I mean? Oh, this person's father is going to be, he's going to be president now, and this person is going to be, this kid is going to be president next, and thing like that. It's crazy how stuff works out. The only difference, like I said, is they need to keep a certain image up in the eyes of the people more so than back then, because they seem to be, back then they just did what they want. Even if it's include, you know, wars and who have the strongest army, because that's another thing. It seems like each person had their own army. Man, that's got to be some scary times, boy.
Lord Protector, which was in no way like a king, even though he was in charge, and it was a hereditary office passed to his son. But the Cromwells didn't last, mainly because his son was a fancy country squire who didn't follow Rule 0, keep the army happy, giving Charles's son, Charles II, the ability to re-establish the monarchy. Charles II had lots of children, all of which were illegitimate, leaving his brother, James II, next in line. But James II was Catholic, and ever since Henry split the church, Catholics had terrible approval ratings. But conveniently, he had nice Protestant daughters, one married to a Dutch prince, who by the nature of these things was the grandson of Charles I. Bonus English legitimacy points, plus who doesn't like the Dutch? With James so unpopular and William and Mary so popular, the army and nobles pretty much invited the royal couple to invade, and James II fled. William and Mary ruled as co-monarchs, but without children, the crown went to Queen Anne, who also didn't produce any heirs, though not from lack of effort. She was pregnant 17 times.
Whoa.
Again, finding themselves with a no royals, no longer situation, Parliament decided it was really, truly, seriously the time to sort out the rules of inheritance, to avoid pretenders from every branch of this messy tree fighting over the crown. Parliament did a royal reboot to clear the cruft, defining Sophia of Hanover, the granddaughter of James dual numbers, to be the new starting point for all claims to the crown. These rules finally stuck, thus ending the very messy time. George George I, son of Sophia, was the first king under the new rules, then his son George II to George III, and even though he lost America and his mind, never fear, the rules are here, so the crown continued to calmly descend the family tree, going to George IV, who didn't have any surviving children, to William IV, who had 10 children, all illegitimate. Then passing through his dead younger brother to Queen Victoria, who started her reign in 1837 and made...
Man, them dudes back there were they were doing it, boy. They had a lot of illegitimate children. Ain't much different from now. Now they just keep them quiet. And there's a scandal come out later. It seems like people knew it back then, but nobody really cared. You know what I mean? Oh, that's just them crazy royal people. They're sowing their wild oats and thing. You know what I mean? But damn, there's a lot of illegitimate children and thing there. You know what I mean? Craziness.
Made it to just over the finishing line of the 20th century, which is a doubly impressively long time given the state of medical technology then. After the end of her age, the crown went to her son Edward VII, to George V, to Edward VIII, who finally breaks up this neat and tidy and somewhat boring line of succession by committing a scandal, marrying a commoner, an American commoner divorcee twice over. Actually, the divorces were a real problem and weren't compatible with the monarch's role as head of state and also the Church of England in the 1930s. Edward abdicated to his brother George VI, who was reluctant to take the crown and then had to oversee World War II and the subsequent breakup of the British Empire, which drained the reluctant king's health, who died at 56, leaving the crown to Elizabeth II in 1952 at the age of 25. 7 years older than Victoria, her great-great-grandmother was on her coronation day, but in early September 2015, Elizabeth became the longest reigning queen in not just British history, but world history. From Elizabeth II, the crown continues on to Charles, the longest heir apparent in British history, to his son William, to his son George. And that is a brief history of the royal family.
Man, that was quite interesting there. It's wild to see that tree come down there and thing, you know what I mean? That's crazy. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, drop a like on the video, leave a link to the description in the description to this video and thing, you know what I mean? And hey, go ahead and subscribe if you like my reactions to these videos, you know what I mean? And in the meantime though, y'all take care of each other, alright? Cool running.